Welcome back to Cradle to Grave Algebra. Today we're going to work with some expressions and some terminology, and we're just going to do a bunch of examples. So let's just jump right into it. We're going to start with some simple stuff like, I'm just going to write some stuff down and talk through it. For example, I'm going to write something down like 2x plus 3 and explain to you that this is a set of terms that make up an algebraic expression. Now, the terms are separated by pluses and minuses. So term 1 would be here. They're not really labeled term 1, but it's a term. So this is a term. This is another term, a 3. Now, if I had a minus f or something like that, this f would be another term. So there's 3 terms in this expression. So I just wanted to kind of point out some of that lingo. And then also, one other thing to mention is multiplication. You see the 2x. Well, that is the same thing as a 2 times, I'll write the x this way to make it a little bit different than the time symbol, but 2 times x, as you've seen, which is equal to also 2 times x in parentheses, which is also equal to 2 in parentheses times x, and so forth. There's so many variations. You could do both of them in parentheses, 2 and x, and that is also equal to, you can also even do this dot notation, a little dot here instead of the times. 2 times x. Doesn't matter if it's in parentheses or not, but that little dot notation means, for the most part, until you get into some matrices, that dot is going to mean a multiplication. If it's a bold dot, then you might want to watch out, but a regular dot just means multiplication. All right, so a couple more things. Let's just delete this and start from scratch once again. All right, so let's do a verbal expression for some of these things here. We have something like, okay, so we have something like 3x to the 5th power. So how do we say that out in English? In English, this would be 3, or we could say the product of 3 and x to the 5th power. So that's how you would say that one. Simple enough. So what if we had 1/2 a plus 6z? How would we write that in English? Let's try that one out. So we can use the term quotient if we'd like. We haven't, I don't think, talked about that term. So we can say the quotient of 1 over 2 times a plus 6 plus the product of 6 and z. So that's one way to write it. We can also just say, you could say 1/2 or the product of 1/2, things like that. But the quotient of 1 over 2 is perfectly fine as well. So when you have a fraction, it might be best to just say the quotient of 1 over 2. And one other way you can put this is, instead of using the quotient, we can go back and actually use the word divided by. That's perfectly fine as well. So we can even say the product of 1 divided by 2 and a plus the product of 6 and z. Now, it's not super important that you use the product of 1 divided by, or you could say 6 times z versus the product of 6 and z, as long as we get it across and it's in plain language, English, so that's a 2. So as long as we get the idea across, that's really the main point. Because what we're obviously going to get into is word problems. Let's do a number t more than 6. Simple enough, right? So a number t more than 6. Well, other than practice, it might be a little difficult. But if you just do 6 plus t, doesn't that kind of answer that question? A number t more than 6. So if this is 6 and you add t to it, that makes sense. So it's just really just practice. You have to do these with practice. Let's do another one. Let's do 10. Ooh, let's try this one. Let's do 10 less than the product of 7 and f. And just to be, I guess, a little more consistent with, we could say 10 with a written out. So let's just try this one here. So 10 less than the product of 7 and f. So remember, we just did the product of 6 and z. So the product of 7 and f would be 7 times f, or 7f, right? 10 less than the product of 7 and f. So if you have the product of 7 and f, what's 10 less than that? You just simply subtract 10. They can be confusing. They can be confusing because, you know, the written word and the order of operations with mathematical expressions could get really confusing sometimes. So you don't want to write out, you know, some of these longer ones, so to speak. But this is just to get you geared up and ready for word problems. Let's try one more. 2/3 of the volume V. So now we're talking about, think about these mathematical expressions we can have. So 2/3 of the volume V, well, 2/3 is just 2 divided by 3, in fact, and then multiply that by the volume V. Remember how the multiplication works and the order of operations, so this is very valid. Let's write this one out the way that you would probably see it. 2/3 of the volume V. So this right here is the same thing as this. Order of operations, 2 divided by 3 times V. 2 divided by 3 times v. Really doesn't matter because it's multiplication and division combined. So, and if you may know or may not know by now, 2 divided by 3 is nothing more than a multiplication problem as well, because 2/3 is just a number, 0.66666 times v. So I hope that resonates. And that is it. Simple enough. I just wanted to knock this one out and move on to the next lesson. So that being said, if you guys find this helpful, please subscribe and like and share this video. Thanks.